She didn't become hard because life broke her. She became hard because being soft kept costing her things she couldn't afford to lose anymore. And somewhere along the way, she started confusing armor with identity. If you are a woman over 40, you know exactly what that feels like. Even if you have never said it out loud, you stopped waiting. You stopped explaining. You stopped showing the parts of yourself that never got treated with the care they deserved. And you called it strength. You called it growth. You called it finally becoming the woman who doesn't need anyone. But what if the very thing you built to protect yourself has become the wall standing between you and the life you actually want? What if the version of you that the world sees right now, composed, self-sufficient, untouchable, is not the most powerful version of you? What if she is? Here is what most conversations about strength in women never actually address. They talk about what you survived. They talk about how much you can carry. They talk about how you kept moving when everything around you was falling apart. And you should be proud of that, genuinely. But surviving is not the same as living. And handling everything is not the same as wanting to. At some point, and for most women it arrives quietly, somewhere in the mid-30s or early 40s, softness stops feeling safe. Not because you made a conscious decision to become harder, but because every time you were soft, something happened. Someone misread it as weakness. Someone took more than you offered. Someone used your openness as an entry point into places they had no right to be. So you adjusted. Slowly. Rationally. You built a version of yourself that was competent, contained, and nearly impossible to wound. A version the world could rely on without ever truly reaching. What the world never told you is that this adjustment, as necessary as it once felt, carried a cost you were not fully warned about. When you close off the parts of yourself that feel too vulnerable, you do not just protect yourself from pain. You also distance yourself from depth, from real intimacy, from the kind of connection that requires you to actually be seen. And the painful truth is that the armor which kept you safe in your 30s may be the very thing quietly suffocating your joy in your 40s. And this is the part most people completely miss. Softness is not naivety. That is the first thing to understand, and it may be the most important reframe this entire video offers you. When you were younger and soft, that softness was often unguarded, open in all directions, to people who deserved it and to people who absolutely did not. And when those people hurt you, your nervous system made a logical conclusion. Softness equals danger. The psychological framework for this is trauma response. Your brain learned to protect you by narrowing emotional openness as a survival mechanism. It was not a character flaw. It was intelligence. It was your system working exactly as designed. But here is what happens over time. The original threat changes or disappears entirely, and the protection remains. You no longer need the armor in the same way, but it is still there, still running, still deciding who gets access to the real you before they even get close enough to ask. This is where cognitive dissonance begins to quietly accumulate. Part of you wants connection. Part of you wants to be fully seen and fully loved. But another part, the part that learned early that openness always costs something, keeps closing the door right before anyone gets close enough to matter. This tension lives in the body. Women over 40 describe it often as a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with being busy. You are tired, but not from work. You are tired from carrying the weight of a self-image that was built for survival and is no longer serving the life you actually want. The competent one. The one who handles it. The one who never asks for too much. She is real. She is strong. But she is also, quietly and consistently, lonely in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it from the inside. But what happens next reveals the real psychology. Because the deeper cost of staying armored is not just emotional isolation, it is identity. When you spend enough years performing the version of yourself the world finds most manageable, the one who is together, the one who is fine, the one who never makes things complicated, you begin to lose access to the actual you. Not dramatically, quietly. You start to forget what you genuinely want as opposed to what you have decided is practical. You forget what it feels like to be reached by something. You forget what you look like when you are not managing anything. Not a relationship, not a situation, not another person's comfort. There is a particular grief that belongs to women who have lived too long inside their armor. It is not grief about the past. It is grief about a version of themselves they can still sense, but can no longer fully access. She is still in there. She never left. She just went quiet because the environment stopped being safe for her. And eventually, she stopped asking to be let out. The women who reclaim their softness at this stage of life do not do it because everything suddenly became safe. They do it because they understood something most people never reach. The greatest risk is not being hurt again. The greatest risk is arriving at 60 and realizing you spent 2 decades protecting yourself from a life you could have actually had. Softness in a woman who has earned her wisdom is not weakness. It is the rarest form of confidence there is. It is the woman who no longer needs to prove anything, and in that freedom becomes entirely, quietly magnetic. Let me ask you something directly. When was the last time you let yourself be fully seen by someone? Not managed, not performed, not strategically presented. Seen. When was the last time you said what you actually needed without immediately following it with a justification for why the need is reasonable, or a quiet apology for having it at all? If you cannot remember, that is not a small thing. That is the answer. The version of you that has been running your life may be impressively constructed. But somewhere underneath all that competence is a woman who is exhausted from being impressive. And she has been waiting for you to notice her for a very long time. This next part is the one that changes everything. The deepest truth about softness, the one that never makes it into a quote or a listicle, is that it requires more courage than anything you have been calling strength. Walking into a room in full control of how you are perceived requires discipline, yes. But letting someone see you uncertain, or genuinely moved, or wanting something from them without knowing if they will meet you there, that requires a level of psychological bravery most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The reason softness feels dangerous is not because it is weak. It is because it is honest. And honesty at the level where someone can actually see who you are beneath your history is the most vulnerable thing a human being can offer another person. Women who reclaim their softness in their 40s do not become less of what they built. They become more. They carry all of it: the discernment, the boundaries, the clarity, the hard-won understanding of who deserves access to them. And they add back the one thing they quietly lost: the willingness to be moved, to be affected, to let something matter deeply enough that it could also, in the right circumstances, hurt them. Not because they have forgotten what hurt costs, but because they have decided that a life lived at permanent emotional distance costs something far greater. And here is what nobody talks about. The women you have met who seem most fully alive, not just accomplished, not just admired, but genuinely, visibly alive, are not the most armored ones in the room. They are the ones who found a way to be both strong and open at the same time. They know where their edges are. They hold them without apology. But inside those edges, they are fully present, fully feeling, fully there. That is not a contradiction. That is the entire point. Strength and softness were never opposites. They were always meant to live in the same body. And the women who understand that are the ones the room cannot stop watching. You have spent enough years being the version of yourself the world needed you to be, the one who held it together, the one who asked for nothing, the one who made sure no one ever saw the full weight of what all that carrying actually cost. And in many ways, that woman is remarkable. But she is not the whole of you. Reclaiming your softness is not a step backward. It is not surrendering what you earned. It is deciding, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, that you deserve full access to your own self. The version of you that can still be reached. The version that still wants things. The version that is no longer willing to trade depth for the illusion of safety. There is an entire layer beneath this that most women only begin to understand when they look honestly at what emotional unavailability has been quietly protecting, and what it has been quietly costing them in the process. That conversation lives somewhere very close to this one. Have you ever had a moment, still, honest, alone, where you realized you have been protecting yourself so completely that even you can no longer get all the way in? Drop that below. I want to read it.